As you can probably tell from your handout, we're going to be looking at Nehemiah chapter 10 tonight. Just kind of a brief review of the context. If you remember, the children of Israel came back, rebuilt the wall under Nehemiah. After that, Ezra starts reading the law to them. They learn about the Feast of Tabernacles. They celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, but also as Ezra is reading the law to them, they realize there's a lot of things that they've left undone that God has commanded them to do. And so after the Feast of the Tabernacle, they come together and they read God's law once again. But chapter 9, we spent studying last week. Basically, I told you it's like a history lesson of the children of Israel, because it's kind of a confession of their sin and how great God is. And you might even call it a prayer. A lot of people think it's a prayer and kind of reflects one. But in it, they talk about the greatness of God, all the things that He's done for His people, their present state now. And really, I think probably verse 38 here of chapter 9 would probably better belong with chapter 10. But here's what it says. It says, "And because of all this, we make a sure covenant and write it. Our leaders, our Levites, and our priests seal it." And so what we're going to read about in chapter 10 is this covenant that the children of Israel make with God. What is a covenant? Agreement, right. Two-sided agreement. And so basically they're making an agreement with God. We're going to read about some of the things that they agree to and agree to do, and why that is important as they're rebuilding their nation. All right, so let's talk about question number 1 here. It goes along with tonight's lesson, but question is this, and I think all of us can appreciate this in our society, but why is a written contract important?
So we can have a lawyer.
So you can sue somebody, right?
written proof that whatever deal, promise, agreement, sale was true.
Yeah. And why is it important to write it down, though? Don't forget. Okay? That could be part of it, right? Sometimes we may forget what we've agreed to or the terms that we've agreed to, right? It's binding. Yeah, it's legally binding, isn't it? It shouldn't, I often talk about this, but, it shouldn't be the case that we have to put things down in writing in order to agree on something. But it is the case that I think to have a record of it is helpful and useful. You think about the children of Israel here. Why would they write this down? Because we just read there in verse 3, he said, we're making this covenant. It wasn't enough just to make the covenant, but then they said, we're going to write it down. And then we're going to have our priests and our leaders and our Levites sign it. So why would they do something like that? Accountability, yeah.
The integrity of the agreement intact.
That's right. And, this was something obviously that they could go back to from time to time and say, hey, remember what we agreed to? Remember the terms that we all committed to? And so we got to stick with this thing. And, you think about devotion and commitment. You know, that's something that probably lacks a little bit in the world that we live in today. But everybody likes a devoted person. I mean, they like a person who's committed their time, their energies, their monies, their thoughts, their resources, to whatever they're involved in. And, you know, practically every person, and I think probably every organization wants devoted people. Would you agree with that? Committed people. You don't want uncommitted people, right? Why is that?
They won't be there when you need them.
Yeah. And that's true in, you know, a business relationship. You know, if you're running a business, you have people working for you. You want those people to be devoted to the business, be committed to it. That'd help, wouldn't it? Yeah. You don't want somebody who's not. What about a spouse? Those of us who are married, you want your spouse to be committed to that marriage, devoted to it? Or you just want them to kind of be along for the ride? We want commitment, don't we? You know, again, I think that's true all across the board. You think about coaches. I mean, you get into the realm of athletics. Do they want players who are devoted and committed? Yeah. Do those players want a coach who's devoted and committed? Sure. And, you know, again, you can do it with the school aspect. Do teachers want students who are devoted, who are committed to the cause? Yeah. And so it's always, I think, the case that regardless of what area of life we're talking about, we want people who are committed to a certain cause. We want people who are going to pour their time and their energy and the resources into a particular cause that they're devoted to. You think about Christianity. What does God want from us? He wants commitment, doesn't he? He wants devotion. Doesn't just want lip service. No, he doesn't want a half-hearted effort. But he wants us to really pour all of our energy and our thoughts and our resources into serving him and living out Christianity here on this earth. Do you think, this is just kind of a think about an idea, you know, these guys sit down and sign the agreement, covenant. Do you think it may make a difference if whenever we're converted we had to sign some kind of agreement? Think that'd be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, we do that when we get married, and it reminds us, you know, to be faithful and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I don't know, you know, it's not that you have to do something like that, but I think sometimes it'd be a lot easier if somebody just come to me and say, hey, remember this? You signed this? You said you do this and you're not doing it? You need to get with it. And I think that was kind of the objective, though, with the children of Israel, don't you? To really, like Wendy said, to really hold themselves accountable. And so they decided, we're going to write this thing down. We're going to sign our names to it. And so we're going to be totally devoted to keeping the law of God. Again, question 2 kind of goes hand in hand. We talked a little bit about that, but I think they felt like that written document of their commitment would be more meaningful than just a verbal commitment. I think they probably thought, you know, we're probably more likely to get people to keep their word if they have to sign their name to a written contract or agreement. And, you know, really, isn't that the case? If you sign your name to a written contract, is that a pretty serious thing?
Can do.
Yeah. And then if you do that and you back it up with an oath to God, I mean, that's about as serious as you can get, isn't it? I don't know of anything else that you could do that would, you know, top those two things. But the covenant that they were making was that they were going to totally follow God. They were going to be committed to him and devoted to keeping his law. And this is important because, remember, disobeying God's law, what got them in trouble in the first place? Got them into captivity, got them into a bad situation. So now they're they want to make sure that that mistake doesn't repeat itself on down the road. Question number 3 here is kind of a history, more of the book of Nehemiah, but kind of looking back historically, what has led up to this point where the children of Israel are now ready to make this commitment to God? What were some of the steps that led them to this particular point?
These are all off into captivity.
Okay, captivity is going to be a major step, isn't it? Going to be part of the reason that they make this commitment, right? What else can you think of?
Were they intermarrying?
Yeah, there were certainly plenty of international relationships, weren't there, that God had forbidden. And so, that had, in and of itself, that had contributed at least to the captivity. That was part of the things that they were doing wrong. Anything else come to mind?
Reading of the law, that's what really motivated them.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're kind of at the point here where they've rebuilt the wall. They've kind of established safety and security in the city. Some people are living there. They've not totally rebuilt all their houses yet, but they're in the process of it. And like we mentioned last week, they're really reestablishing a nation, aren't they? They're really reestablishing Israel itself. And so when you reestablish that nation, they want to be sure that they do it right. And of course, when they read God's law, they read about all these things they should have been doing that they weren't. And they said, we got to get it right this time. We can't go through this again. We got to make sure we get it right. And so let's make this commitment here. Let's make this agreement, this covenant with God, that we're going to keep his law, that we're going to be devoted to following his commandments, whatever they may be. And that's why when we read through some of these things that seem pretty difficult, to their credit, they were all in, weren't they? They were going to completely do what God told them to do. But they knew that that foundation, that new foundation that they were building on had to be built upon God, had to be built upon his word if it was going to be, or if it was going to last. So Nehemiah was the first to sign this agreement. Then we read about Zedekiah signs after him. 21 priestly leaders sign it. We have 17 Levitical leaders that also sign this covenant, and then 44 political leaders that are mentioned there in the first part of chapter 10. So I throw out all those numbers so we don't have to read all those names right there, but that's kind of a summation of what we're reading about, the names of those leaders and people that signed this agreement. Then you read about some things that they start doing in order to keep God's law. And one of those is they start separating from their neighbors that we read about, then the people of the land. So question number 4, why did they do that? Yeah, to limit their influence, but it wasn't just that somebody along the line said, hey, we probably be a good idea if we didn't associate this with these guys, right? They did it because it was the law of God, wasn't it? And so you read about there in verse 28, it says, all those who had separated themselves from the peoples of the land of the law of God, their wives, their sons, and their daughters, everyone who had knowledge and understanding. So, from the top to the bottom, young, old, male, female, they all separated those relationships with those nations to whom God said, don't have any covenants, don't have any relationships, don't make any agreements with them. And so that was certainly part of it. But, what kind of people was Israel surrounded by? When you think about the nations that surrounded them, who were some of the nations?
Idolatry was rampant.
Yeah. And all those nations that surrounded them, right? And so they were very idolatrous people. They wanted the Jews to become like them, didn't they? They really wanted the Jews to kind of incorporate themselves into their societies and make agreements and business relationships with them, and religiously, go along with them. All those things that you would expect from other people socially. I mean, they wanted socially for them to interact with them too. But the problem was the law of Moses prohibited God's people from living like all the other nations around them. And so that separation it wasn't just meanness, but it was done because it was devotion to God. That's the agreement that they made, right? We're going to be totally committed to God and to His Word and His law, and here's what God said about these nations. Don't make any covenant, don't make any agreements with them. And so we're not going to do that. Question number 5 here, what general oath do the people make and bind themselves to? Not all the people sign this, obviously. We've talked about in this return, we're reading about over 50,000 Jews. So that'd take a lot of paper for 50,000 Jews to sign their names to this. Not everybody signed it. The main figures, political, religious figures of that day and age did sign it though. But the people made a verbal agreement. And they verbally, what verbal agreement did they make?
The law of Moses, the commandments of God.
Yeah, and if you notice in verse 29 there, it says they entered into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law. So here's basically what they did. They made this promise or this oath, we're going to keep God's law, but they also incorporated the curses of God's law. You remember the curses? What were some of the curses that came along with not keeping God's law?
Be kicked out of their land.
Yeah. Yeah, but they not only verbally agreed to keep God's law, they also verbally agreed, if we don't, here's what is going to happen to us, and it's going to be justified. And so they were sure to include those curses in that verbal commitment that they made. Even the children, if you read about it, any of those people who had knowledge, who had understanding, even children, entered into this verbal agreement. You read about some proselytes who were there. They did the same thing. They entered into this verbal agreement too. And every citizen basically said they would obey God's law or else accept the curses that came along with not obeying God's law. I think we talked about last week the importance of a nation being built on and around God's law. But when you think about the children of Israel here, and not just the children of Israel, but like I said last week, I think it was last week, it's still applicable today. If you want to have a successful nation, what does that nation need to be built on? God's laws and commandments, doesn't it? And the reason that that's so important is why?
Because he's the ultimate ruler to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one in control, right? So if you honor and respect God, that's going to give favoritism toward your nation. If you don't honor and respect God or His laws, what does God think of a nation like that? Doesn't have any respect for them either, does it? But that's what it takes to have a successful society. And you think about society today, if everybody obeyed God's laws, what would our society be like? Be perfect, wouldn't it? Unfortunately, we're not perfect people, right? But God's law, it does tell us how to treat one another. Tells us to love our neighbors as ourselves. Tells us to respect human life, property, and the rights of other people. So think about how different society would be if we just did what God told us to do. I mean, there'd be no murders, there'd be no thefts, no assaults. Would there be any discrimination? Wouldn't have to worry about that either. imagine a society where everybody looked out for the welfare of each other. And imagine the idea that, nobody was a selfish person. There was no greed, no covetousness. Just everybody was just reaching out and giving and caring for one another. I mean, to me, I was thinking about that, but to me, again, we're imperfect people, but that's a pretty good picture of the Lord's church, isn't it? I mean, sometimes we fall miserably short of God's glory. I understand that, but in general, that's what the Lord's church is like. And the reason that it's like that is because we honor and respect God's laws. And that's what makes us the way that we are. But that's true for nations too. And of course, the nation of Israel here understood that. Question number 6 here. This is kind of a good think about it discussion question. Why do you think it sometimes takes negative experiences to refocus our attention on God?
Well, they want to know the truth about the situation and say, there's got to be truth.
Okay.
What's truth?
Yeah. Certainly it does usually cause you to rethink, doesn't it? Or re-examine, maybe that's a better word, re-examine and figure out, well, usually if you have a negative experience, you try to figure out what did I do wrong? Where did I mess up? What do I need to change?
When things are good, you take it for granted, and you gain perspective when times are tough, or when you go through challenges, or there's negative reinforcement.
Yeah, and I think, we live obviously in a society where we're blessed beyond measure. But how many of our blessings do we take for granted? Just about all of them, I would agree. I think about times like, when you lose electricity. I mean, how many days do you ever wake up and just think, man, isn't it amazing we have electricity? It's usually after you have a negative experience, isn't it? After you've been out of electricity for a week or 10 days sometimes. But you realize, man, we got all these blessings and we're surrounded by all these great things and we don't even realize it. We just take them for granted. But sometimes it takes things like that, negative experiences, adversity, failures, that'll cause you to rethink matters, reevaluate. And that's what you have with the children of Israel, isn't it? It took failure for them to reevaluate their situation and say, hey, we need to make some changes here. Something's not right. But failure and negative experiences, I think they make us feel weak, don't you? Make us feel like we need help. Because generally, if all you do is succeed in everything that you do, what do you feel like?
Don't need any help.
Well, you feel like you're strong and you're independent, right? Don't need any help from anybody because you're successful in everything that you're doing. But those negative experiences can steer us in a positive direction if we use them, and that's the way the children of Israel used them. All right, let's talk about question 7 here. What were some of the specifics of the oath between God and the people of Israel? Basically, this oath that they made revolved around 2 main ideas. Can you pick out the 2 main ideas there in verses 30 through 39?
Don't intermingle in relationships and give the firsts to God.
Yeah. And, those, well, I guess you could probably even say 3 main ideas. But yeah, the first one is the relationships, right? That's their first focus. You got to take care of all these things. And then they go back to the idea of the Sabbath. And what was so important about the Sabbath?
It belongs to God.
Yeah.
Not ours to do what we want.
And how we can mix question 8 in here because we're running out of time, but how did they make, what plans did they make when it came to the Sabbath to keep it holy? How are they going to do that?
They weren't gonna do business.
Yeah. They said, we're not doing any business on the Sabbath day. And you know, when you think about the Sabbath was obviously a Jewish practice, right? Did any of the Gentile nations around them practice the observance of the Sabbath? No. That was for the Jews and for Israel only. And all the other nations around them treated the seventh day like any other day of the week, right? You did what you normally do any other day of the week, but it was different for the Jews. You didn't socialize like you normally did. You didn't do business like you normally did. And why was that? What was this day all about?
Supposed to be a day of rest.
Yeah. It wasn't to be a day of bondage or misery, where you had to go work. But it was to be a rest. And why did God give them that rest?
Because he'd take the seventh day as his. I mean, he had rested.
Yeah. Well, when he chose a day for him to rest, yeah, he chose the day he rested, right? But why did he give them a Sabbath in the first place? Why did he give them a day of rest?
For remembrance.
Yeah. What were they supposed to remember?
Creation.
Not creation.
But their form of bondage was there.
Yeah. What happened when they were in Egypt?
They worked all the time.
Worked 7 days a week, right? Round the clock. When God brought them out, he said, I'm going to give you this day so that you'll remember. You remember I brought you out of that. You remember you were down here and you were slaves and I rescued you from that situation. And that's really what the Sabbath was all about. It was about remembering what God did for them back there in Egypt. And of course, it was a reminder to them that God brought them out of Egypt for a special purpose. Right? Gave them this land, put them in it for a reason. And so God had a plan and a reason and you could say a calling for them. There was a reason why God called them out of Egyptian bondage and brought them into this land. And that day, the Sabbath day, was supposed to remind them of that. And so it was important. It was important to remember that because obviously it's important to remember what God did for them, and they're supposed to be different. There wasn't just a Sabbath day, though. What else were there?
Well, it was, and you talking about like this year, Jubilee, or
Okay, that's one of them, right? What happened every seventh year? Or what was supposed to happen every seventh year?
Let the lame lay and not work.
Yeah, you were not supposed to work your land. We're supposed to go out, plant a crop, harvest a crop, pick your fruit off your trees, bring all that in. Why was that?
he was going to provide, make sure that they have enough to get through. I mean, he was going to have it all provided if you did it.
Yeah.
You didn't need that.
And that's what God told them. He said, don't worry about not having enough. I'll take care of you. Can you imagine doing that today, though? You imagine if every 7 years we had to take a year off and God said, don't work this year and don't make any money. Do you think that'd take faith to trust God and do that? Yeah, it would have taken tremendous faith. But again, it was supposed to be done to remind them about who they were, about the fact that they were putting all their faith and trust in God and not in this land, not in the material things. And then you had the year of Jubilee, right? What was the year of Jubilee?
Cancel all that.
Yeah, every 7 Sabbaths, or 7 sabbatical years, so every 50 years, basically. You had the Sabbath on the 49th year, and then you had another year, which was the year of Jubilee. So you actually had 2 years back to back where you didn't bring anything in. And all debt was canceled. You had any debt, you were free to that debt that year. And again, all these things were set up to remind them about God, what God did for them. God set them free. God got them out of debt when they couldn't pay it for themselves.
How many times do you think that happened before this?
None.
That's what I'm wondering, because it's 50 years and how many years?
Yeah, well, actually, the bondage, what was the bondage? You remember, Will? Was it 70 Sabbaths? 70 sabbatical years?
I think it was like 470 years.
Yeah.
It did not.
Yeah.
It did not follow the plan, and that's why it had 7 years of captivity.
Got it. Yeah. I don't remember exactly where that's at. Do you?
Ezekiel.
Will's been teaching Revelation in the back, so he's really brushed up. Anyway, it's in there. But it actually says, it names the amount, and the 70 years of captivity was because of the 70 sabbatical years that they didn't keep. So 400 and whatever you said it was.
490 total years.
Yeah.
That made up for the.
So we know they didn't do it for 490 years. I don't know about before that. But
I mean, because like from the time that they got into
Yeah.
Israel to this time wasn't that long, all that 400 or 500 years, right?
yeah. So, I mean, we're about 500. So we're probably 1,000 years. We're probably about 1,000 years, give or take. So at least half of it, we know they didn't do it. But, you know, again, it would have taken a lot of faith.
Yeah.
A lot of faith for people to do that. And if you're material minded, you wouldn't have done it. No way. But, you know, God tells us to do some things that take faith too. Jesus told us, put the kingdom first. And he said, don't worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear. Do what I tell you to do. The rest will take care of itself. Let's see here. We're out of time. Does anybody have any of these others you want to talk about? Basically, the people ensured that they were going to bring enough. They were going to do what they were supposed to do. They're going to bring the first fruits in. They're going to bring the first fruits of their trees, of their crops, of their children, of their oxen, of their flocks, of their vineyards, of their olive yards. And they said, we're gonna make sure that the Levites can live on these offerings. And we're going to do our part to make sure that, you know, we're giving them enough so that they're going to be able to survive. And why was that necessary? Why did they have to bring stuff for the Levites?
Levites didn't have any land.
Didn't have any land. Very few possessions, very little land, usually a little piece in the city. Certainly no farmland, no croplands, not a humongous amount of animals. They had no way to make money. And so God did that so that they could focus on their service in the temple. That's what he wanted them to focus on, be able to do that and not have to worry about making a living out there in the world. And in order for that to happen, the children of Israel had to bring all these first fruits in.
And the firstborn, they said they had to bring that, praise the Lord, so they could redeem that child.
Yeah.
That's what I read.
Yeah.
Think about what was the going rate on redeeming the child, or?
I don't remember. It says in there. I don't remember what it was though.
If they couldn't redeem the child, then he worked in the temple or something like
Yeah, he'd be dedicated to the temple service. But you know, you could do the same too for ox and for sheep. If you really wanted them, you could redeem them. You could pay the tax and redeem them. There's also the census tax. You know, they talk about it. People said, we're going to do that, half a shekel every year. Every person was supposed to give 20 years old and up for the census to help operate the temple. But basically the people said, we're going to do our part, make sure we can keep this thing going like it's supposed to. All right. That's the covenant of the people. Anybody got any thoughts or comments before we end?
this. The chapters we're in, 9 and 10, is coinciding with Ezra 9 and 10. Is this the same timeline?
Yeah. We're basically, I think what we established is that 12 or 13 years before that Nehemiah or Ezra comes. And then Nehemiah shows up, let's see, 7th year and the 20th year. That's 13.
So in Ezra, when they did away with their non-Jewish wives,
Yeah.
is this the same? Is this different than what we're doing now?
I would say it's the same. I mean, it doesn't just come out and say it's the same, but it kind of makes sense that that's when all this would be happening, whenever we're reading about it in Nehemiah. And of course, you know, we read back in chapters 8 and chapter 9 where Ezra's reading the law. So just, it makes sense to me that that's when it would be. But I don't know of any biblical statement where it just comes out and says this is the exact time in the book of Ezra that you're reading about here. So, all right, anybody else?